concern within the community, whether it be Jewish or non-Jewish at that point. How can you have one person suffer, and how can you have that same person come as a king? If he suffers and dies, that's it. It's all over, unless you know some way of getting him back again. And if he comes back, then is he going to be a king? And even if he is a king, will he bring peace? And if he brings peace, will this enter and bring us into the grand hope that all the peoples of the world have ever had?
For the people that didn't hear last week, though, and before Dr. Lapide gets in here, the thing is, you've got to admit that the Jews had a lot of verses that supported their idea, exactly what Peter was saying. They were looking for the Messiah to come and conquer. Okay? Give us the verse that shows the other side that, if you want, should be the balance there from your position.
Well, I think the key verse that says that connects the word Messiah, and the word Messiah doesn't occur that frequently within the biblical text, and especially as it applies to our topic. We may be talking about a very, very limited, maybe less than 40 examples, and out of those 40, perhaps only 9 or 10 apply to our particular topic here. But Daniel chapter 9, I think, in the famous 70-week prophecies, which is a very complicated prophecy, but this much is clear. There is a discussion of Mashiach, of Messiah, the anointed one, and the Messiah will be cut off. That's clear. He will be cut off. So the connection of a Messiah being cut off is found here, but yet there's so many other passages where he comes triumphant. Zechariah 14, he touches down on the Mount of Olives, and the mountain splits north and south, and he sets up a rule of everlasting peace. Now, how do you make these two fit together? And my answer, which I think is the Christian answer, and is Yeshua's claim, Jesus' claim, that is, they are put together in one person. For he died, but he rose again. As Dr. Lapide has so brilliantly documented, that you do have the resurrection, and it did take place. It is factual, and I'm indebted to my good brother for the brilliant piece of work that he did on documenting the fact that Jesus died, and indeed, he did come back. He was resurrected.
And did it historically. Dr. Lapide, in your response to Dr. Kaiser, let me come to your direction and say, okay, I asked him, was Peter wrong? Obviously, there are a lot of verses that show the Messiah will come and conquer. At the same time, do you recognize, does the Jewish community recognize its own verses in the Old Testament that show that the Messiah will also come and suffer?
I'm afraid it's a little bit more complicated.
Okay.
At the time of Jesus, as far as documentation in Judaism can prove it, we have 14 different distinguishable Messianic expectations, which are all children of the fervent Messianic hope of Israel and the pluralism which has been inbuilt in my creed. Take pluralism on one leg and the fervent hope on the other, and what do you get? 14 different expectations. The two prevalent ones are the reigning, winning, victorious Messiah who chases the Romans out, whose yoke hangs heavily on Israel's neck, and then establishes in Jerusalem the kingdom of God, and a suffering Messiah, who is almost the antithesis, has been prevalent also in many circles of contemporary Judaism in the first century. Peter, who is called the rock man, and the name implies a mentality of a guy who, well, a go-getter, I would say today in America. He couldn't possibly fall in love with the idea of a suffering Messiah. Therefore, he wanted none of it to happen to his beloved Master Jesus. But I have a suspicion, after reading through the Gospels for 30 years, that Jesus' self-understanding, the $64 question of all theology, was, at least in the last 2 weeks of his life, a combination of the suffering servant of God who has to go through death in order to come back as Daniel's Son of Man on the clouds of heaven to bring the kingdom of heaven. That alone explains to me the tormenting puzzle of the headlong flight of the apostles at Golgotha. What's the matter with them? He chose them each. They must have been perfect, fine people, stout in belief, if not Nobel Prize winners at least, in intelligence. But certainly stout in belief. And why did they flee when their master died in a most cruel manner after he had pre-announced his suffering 3 times to them? Were they deaf? No, they were not. The only explanation for their flight to me is that they imagined the course of events to be a quick 2-act drama. His passion, his crucifixion, his death, and immediately followed by his return upon the clouds of heaven. Good Friday passes, Saturday drags on, they scan the heavens, they look into their heart, despair grows, and then the flight begins as an almost abandonment of all the Messianic hope Jesus had instilled in them in 3 years. That's the way I think it happened. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense that these 12 apostles flee like frightened chicken.
I think that's a possible scenario. Yet on the other hand, I really think that even as they're gathered in the upper room some days later on, the events of Easter Sunday morning have already taken place. These individuals are normal people. They're regular. We don't have super plastic saints here. We have normal people with all of the fears and intimidations. And I think the great hope was that I don't see where it really ever did figure with the suffering and the dying part. This wasn't true when the mother of James and the other disciple came up and said, can my 2 boys be high up in the government here when they set it up? I'd like them to be treasurer and secretary. Can they really get in on this? And the concept all the time was the kingdom of God. Bring your rule in, bring your reign in. None of this crosstalk, none of this suffering. They had never connected the whole theology of the tabernacle and the temple has now been lost, that we have gone into the exile. We have forgotten atonement theology, and we're talking about only kingly theology. And because of that disparity, the disciples are only thinking kingly theology. They're not thinking at all about the suffering mode of it. And when Jesus appears, they still can't believe it. They think it's a ghost. And when the women tell them, they say, oh, that can't be right. They are totally unprepared for it. But this is not to say that there were no people in Israel like that. Why, even when Anna was there in Luke 2, and Simeon, they bring Jesus in just as a baby, only a few days old. And Simeon will take him up and say that famous, "Nunc dimittis, now lettest thy servant depart in peace," he said, "because my eyes have seen your salvation." He was among those who were waiting for the consolation of Israel. There was a cadre, a she'erit, a remnant. God always has had a remnant. You can't go by the majority. How many are raising their hands? If you ask how many were for this in Israel, it's an abysmal thing. The Gallup poll would have all been on one side. But there was a remnant here, a few. And Simeon and Anna and the others who were waiting for the consolation of Israel. But in the election of God, he took that which was simple to confound the wise, is the New Testament way of saying. He took that where people who didn't have skills or ordinarily were not those who would